The Navy was having the U-boat problem, the submarine problem with the Germans, and reached out to academics to bring analytic rigor to helping them solve the problem of how they dealt with the German submarine threat. The academics basically said initially, well, give us your data and we'll take a look at what we got. And they got the Navy's data, and lo and behold, just like what happens today, they said, Navy, your data is
David Broyles is a research program director and specialist in cyber operations, artificial intelligence and autonomy, special operations, and information warfighting at CNA, an independent nonprofit research and analysis organization. He has served as a CNA field representative to numerous commands, including the United States Fleet Forces Command and those in Iraq and Afghanistan.
As you're bringing more unmanned systems online, the military has to adjust. We're going to see this very slow and likely painful evolution as they figure out how to stand up new organizations that are dedicated or at least capable of handling these systems.
This is a hard thing to see. It's a hard problem.
The big issue there, the big concern is All right, my name is Dave Broyles, and I work with CNA, which I'm told here is a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit research and analysis organization. And I want to make sure I got that right.
Yeah, we need to get that right on the top, everyone. That's what the CNA is.
That is CNA. Now, what that means in practical purposes is CNA operates a federally funded research and development center, which is the Center for Naval Analyses, and that's the side that I work for. They also operate the Institute for Public Research, which does work for other government agencies such as the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, and other agencies.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's fair to say this is a think tank?
That is the word that we don't prefer.
Okay.
Research and analysis organization. Part of that reason that we kind of rankle at that one is because our origins go back to World War II, where the Navy was having the U-boat problem, the submarine problem with the Germans, and reached out to academics to bring analytic rigor to helping them solve the problem of how they dealt with the German submarine threat.
How did we?
Well, okay, so they reached out to the academics. The academics basically said initially, well, give us your data. We'll take a look at what we got. And they got the Navy's data, and lo and behold, just like what happens today, they said, Navy, your data is shit. We need to go out on the ships and collect the data for ourselves and understand what's going on.
They went out into the war?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they went out, they collected that information, and then they kind of looked at it from a first principles problem. Okay, so what are the principles of play here? What's happening? And they laid down what is now the fundamentals of search and screen theory. How do you search for an object when you don't know where it is, but you have an idea of where it's been, all those sorts of things. And through that, they help the Navy to develop tactics to counter the submarine threat.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So wait, they were doing so you guys went out and collected better acoustic data?
It was largely data on what sort of assets we were bringing to the fight.
Can we get a U-boat picture up, Jack? I need to look at one of these. Yeah.
But you've got airplanes that are doing spotting. Unfortunately, I'm not a anti-submarine warfare expert, so this is a little bit rusty for me. You've got airplanes flying along trying to spot things. You've got sightings and other things, that information that you're dealing about. This submarine was last seen over here, and so based on all those sorts of things, and about where you're going.
So you're kind of like doing a position analysis too, of where the enemies are tracking and trying to find patterns there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And also just trying to figure out what are the most efficient search patterns.
Yep.
That was all new and nascent back in the day.
Well, you gotta give. I mean, they're also fighting a war, so they probably don't have time to think about these things.
Right. And that's a pretty common problem we find, is that when we go out to support whether exercises or actual operations, we're the person that's dedicated there to be thinking about gathering information and trying to figure stuff out. Everyone else is just trying to do their job. And so that allows us to come in as extra capacity and bandwidth to then just focus on that. And so that whole relationship has evolved over the many decades that we've been involved with the Navy. So we are now what is formerly called the Federally Funded Research and Development Center for the Navy and the Marine Corps, the FFRDC. And we still maintain what we call a field program, where we have analysts who go and are part of a command as their staff analyst for, say, 2 to 3 years, or are even deployed on carrier strike groups or out to war zones. I myself got to spend time in Iraq and Afghanistan, where our job out there is to figure out what are the issues at hand, what data is available, how do we analytically tackle those problems and then move out on figuring out solutions.
And then you feed these to like the commands, basically.
Yeah.
What years were you in Iraq and Afghanistan?
So let's see. I've been at CNA for 20 years. I got there in 2004. And I was supposed to go to my first field assignment in Corpus Christi, Texas, with the Naval Mine Warfare Command in 2006. But I think like a month before I was supposed to move there, my boss's boss comes in and says, "Hey, Dave, how'd you like to spend 3 months in Iraq?" Like, huh. I was like, yeah, sign me up. So what we were doing at that time, this was summer 2006. If you recall, right, we're in Iraq, big IED threat, the improvised explosive device threat. And so that's taken a lot of our military personnel. And they're doing the counterterrorism mission following our presence there. So the government at the time was trying to grapple with how do we deal with this threat? And you will see the parallels with what's happening now with counter-drone warfare and all those sorts of things, right? But this was in a war zone environment. You got the enemy using a new tactic, which is very effective against our forces. How do we now counter it? So they stood up all these sort of capabilities, throwing lots of money at the problem. They stood up the Joint IED Defeat Organization, JIDO. And as part of that, they brought in the analytic groups. Again, the FFRDCs, there was us, there was IDA, the Institute for Defense Analysis, and I believe there are others as well. But our effort was to provide analysts to help think about the problem. So we had people here in the DC area sort of doing the big data crunching problem. But then we sent analysts forward into Iraq to serve as eyes on the ground and to help, again, because people are busy doing their job, to help the people back here who are trying to understand, like, okay, this is what data we got, what does it mean, what's the context of it, how good is it, helping to be their eyes and ears of like, I don't understand, like I'm looking at this data table, like give me the context for this. And so creating those channels while also simultaneously trying to help the units that are out there in Iraq. So
IEDs, like what are some of the key takeaways that you guys, brought to us?
I think you see a lot of, when you look at it, it's sort of the expected evolution of tactics and counter tactics, right?
Yeah.
So we're even like what we're seeing in Russia, Ukraine today with drone warfare. The enemy is trying to just figure out what are effective ways to take our guys out, right? And so they'll try various things and whatever. And as things they find out like that worked, right? They sort of double down on it. And so we figure out what they're doing and we adjust, and it's just a constant dance of adjustment.
It's like the one thing with the IED, like we like tried to put something in front of our vehicles to like take them out first, and then they just like changed the fuse time limit or something.
That's right. Yeah. So I was out there when that was going on, and the unit that I was at was particularly about radio controlled jamming and countering. So RC IEDs.
Okay.
And so we were fielding a bunch of equipment, and just to get a sense of kind of like my recollection of what was happening. Again, the threat was so large, the amount of technology and everyone trying to help and provide good stuff was so large that it was overwhelming. So when we went out there, and the reason that capability was necessary to send out there was there were these boxes that were being installed on the Humvees that were jamming devices, right?
Yep.
And the soldiers would take their Humvee into this depot because they were told to, and then these contractors would come in, put in this box, add an antenna and all that stuff, and then tell them, here's how you turn it on. Good luck. And that was it. They weren't giving any other training.
Yeah.
They weren't told how to update the software, which is really important in a counter IED environment where threats change and you need to change your threat load of the frequencies that are being operated on. The point is, at some point, people realize like we need to put in a better infrastructure here to support those people, so they know they've got people that can maintain the equipment, make sure it's up to date, that they're using it properly, and to make sure that that equipment is getting better effective use. So that unit was stood up, largely populated by Navy, because the Navy had a huge cadre of electronic warfare officers that are used to fighting in the electromagnetic space.
Yeah.
And the Army had, at the time, largely let that decay. So Navy was brought in as a little bit of a patch to help the Army resuscitate that capability.
That makes sense.
So yeah, so that whole thing got stood up for that very reason. And I think one of the key things that we saw over that period was, I remember looking at the data, trying to figure out like how are things going here. And you could look at, right, there are many different types of IEDs. There were ones that were command wire detonated, where either someone is physically pushing the wires together to blow it up. There were pressure plates. There were then the remote controlled ones that were using an electromagnetic spectrum. And you could watch, even while the course of the time that we were over there, that the proportion of the radio-controlled IEDs were starting to shrink. Now,
is that because of the jamming?
Well, that's the problem, right? It's correlation. Is it causation?
Yeah.
That was less important, I guess, to us, other than to show like, hey, look, the enemy is shifting tactics here to the other types of devices. So that's going to have operational.
And that's kind of happening
considerations.
now too. Like there are fewer radio controlled ones. You know, I don't know if you've seen like the ones with like fiber optic spooling. The drones. Like they're moving away so they can't be jammed. Right. That kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. And I think, and as you mentioned, right, there was that whole device that was meant to try to pre-trigger. And the same thing happened, as you mentioned, right? That they quickly figured out, I think at that time, so they were using these explosively formed penetrators, right? It's a very special type of explosive that it's basically using the explosive to liquefy a metal plate and then turn it into a jet of molten metal that can pierce through anything, or at least pierce through a lot of stuff. And, you know, they used to just have an array of these things that they would sit on the side of the road. So it would be this barrage that would fire. And yeah, they basically just started, you know, turning them in multiple directions so that it would span over a wider range. So even if you sort of pre-triggered it, it would still kind of manage to hit or clip your vehicle. So simple countering.
Yeah.
But what you saw there at the time too was that particular tactic, or at least one of the early tactics that was developed to counter what the terrorists were doing, what the insurgents were doing, was developed in-house by one of the soldiers at one of the units. They came up with this device that they were able to kludge together from stuff they had on hand. And then the larger organization, sort of like recognizing the value in it, tried to formalize it. So in other words, we've got this, you know, prototype system. We can produce this.
Yeah.
And in classic form, they started to produce this thing, but it took many months. And by the time all that got refielded out, the enemy had quickly adapted, and so it had been less relevant.
It's tough. These are the cat and mouse games of war, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so today we talked a little bit before we started rolling. You mentioned that, you know, you do a lot of like undersea mines work, or like a lot of Navy focused stuff right now. Like obviously the Pacific theater's getting hot. Like what are some of the areas of research for the firm now? Yeah,
so I started in naval mine warfare, and back in my day. The
kids.
Yeah, mid 2000s, it was largely a countermeasures focus. That is, in other words, the enemy is using mines to close, like, you know, the Panama Canal or the Strait of Hormuz, and we have the forces to get rid of the enemy's mines and reopen whatever they've closed. The focus was very much on that. The Navy maintains a countermeasures capability, and it maintains a mining capability, our ability to deploy our own mines. But in like the mid-2000s, the Navy was largely letting that mining capability decline. There was just less urgency and need and use for it, and we had various ways to deploy mines, but they were just being left kind of where they were. Things were starting to get old and retiring, and not new capabilities were coming online. It wasn't a priority.
Yeah.
What I think we've seen over the last decade or so, as the focus in the Pacific has increased, mining has become revitalized as an area of interest, as a potential tool that we can use to, as they say, you know, inflict additional decision calculus on the enemy from the perspective of making the area a little bit more difficult for the enemy to figure out how to maneuver. And from at least my perspective, from the mine warfare game, that has certainly been an area of resurgence. But I think for for my organization as a whole, the way that we organize is we have different divisions that kind of have different focuses. And I'm in the operations division where we're more worried about like, hey, we're going out there today, right now. How do we do what we're doing better? But we have people that are more technically focused that are looking at potential either capabilities that we have acquired now and their technical limitations and capabilities and vulnerabilities, and helping to inform future systems and
Yeah.
things like that. And then we have other people that focus on, say, more the Paul Mill side of things or the resource and management side of things. The point is, a fair amount of the focus is now certainly on the Pacific, and it's kind of I would say, all over the map, depending on who we're working with, whether it's entities like Pacific Fleet or Indo-PACOM that are trying to figure out what are the various mechanisms that we have available, what do we need to be working with, and how are we going to employ those. And so,
do you study like on the, not to interrupt, but like on the new technology, like unmanned surface vessels or something like Indo-PACOM, I'm sure is looking at stuff like that, or that kind of technology? Are you guys looking at? Have you seen stuff like that?
Yeah,
like Saronic or some of the other companies that are doing that.
Yeah,
like the kamikaze boats.
Right. Yeah. No, we sometimes get pulled in to look at specific, either say an analysis of alternatives. Say like we're looking for a particular capability. What's the panoply of options there?
Yeah.
And given our requirements, like which ones will be more beneficial than others, or which ones suit our purposes better than others?
Do you think a lot of that is like they have a product they want to buy in mind and they're trying to justify it, or which one comes first?
What I've seen, it depends.
Yeah,
it depends is the safe answer there. It can go both ways, and I've certainly seen it both ways. The hardest thing to articulate is what exactly are you trying to do, right? In other words, sometimes it's like, well, okay, we want to win. Yeah, I got it. Okay, that's a good start. So now let's figure out how you're actually going to do that. And the reason that's important is because absent a particular application about how you're going to use something, it's easy to look at any tool and find some potential use for it. The real question is, what are you actually trying to do, and what is the best tool for the job? And so when we have the option, we try to help provide at least that sort of focus and framework, which is, let's start with the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, whether it's a particular operation or campaign or even at the tactical level. Now let's work through a way, so if you can articulate what exactly you're trying to do, then you can start to more work that backwards into, okay, now how are you going to understand what tools you can bring to do that job? Even what capabilities are you going to have, which this is important here, particularly as we get more into the unmanned systems and other capabilities, which is the military doesn't necessarily have the people that are trained and can operate particular systems depending on what they're buying. And this is kind of like both a short-term and a longer-term issue, is as you're bringing more unmanned systems online, the military has to adjust and has to provide, personnel training pipelines. It has to provide professional development career tracks, all these things that are currently optimized around crewed systems, systems that are designed to have people in them. And we're going to see this very slow and likely painful evolution as they figure out how to stand up new organizations that are dedicated or at least capable of handling these systems, and figure out the balance of those, of the manned platforms, the crewed platforms, and the uncrewed and platforms.
Yeah, that's a really hard problem. Obviously, there's a lot of advantages of the uncrewed systems. You just have a lot fewer chances to die.
Mm-hmm.
So that's nice. But, maybe the systems aren't as capable yet as potential. Like they can't inflict as much damage as like maybe like a cruiser with a full battery of guns.
Right.
But a cruiser can get shot really easily by like a hypersonic missile or something.
Right. Yeah. And particularly when we're looking at areas of denial where that the enemy is able to deliver firepower, serious firepower, in an area where you don't want to be able to send an important platform under that threat envelope. I think also we're still working out a lot of the operational considerations. How are we actually going to use these? And the example I often use about not thinking about how we're going to use these things is what happened in the Persian Gulf, North Arabian Gulf, with the sail drone that got kidnapped briefly by the Iranians.
Yeah, I saw that.
Right. It was a good example of, I'm not sure. I need to speak very carefully in the sense of I was not involved in any of those operations.
Yeah.
I saw what was in the media, but it certainly raised the question of, had anyone thought through the process of like, we have an unmanned system out there. What are we going to do if someone tries to steal it? But take that further back, which is now think about the situation we're in. I've got this device out there. The specific system doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
I've got this device out there that is going to be alone or potentially alone. And I wanted to do a mission, whether it's, ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or some other mission. What's my comfort level with that thing being destroyed, captured, or anything? Because now
it should be high.
Right, exactly. But if now I'm like, well, someone is now stealing that, I need to go send something to retrieve it, or at least protect it. Now I've created a burden that I didn't have before, which is I thought I had a new thing on the battlefield to help me out, but now I'm sort of using it as a tether. In other words, right, I've got this thing floating out in the ocean to help me with some eyeballs, but now I have to make sure I always have a cruiser or a DDG around it to protect it. Okay, so why don't you just have the DDG or the crew? Right, so it's like,
well,
what
you
is
got to
the-
you got to probably just assume that these are attritable and that they're ephemeral.
Right.
Well,
but so that goes back into the design of this whole thing, which is, was there an understanding at the time that when we made this thing, that was how we were going to operate it, that it was going to be disposable, and who's going to make that decision to say like, well, maybe that's okay for, a $10,000 device, but what if it's a $10 million device or even $1 million device? How are we going to handle that? And is there going to be any sensitivity to any of the equipment that's on board? So in some of those cases, there's some high-end equipment that we're not going to want anyone to have their hands on. So have we put the appropriate mechanisms in place to ensure that should something happen in that system, that the adversary doesn't learn anything that we don't want them learning?
It sounds like, at least for things like the sail drone, then there's a lot of considerations for the Navy before they would actually bring these things at scale.
Right.
Which is kind of from the business side, corporate world, what I hear too from the business development teams of these companies. They spend a lot of time trying to talk to the Navy about how to incorporate these into the mission.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not as much about the technology.
Right.
And I think that's actually might be a big problem.
Mm.
We're sitting around thinking about, all of these things, which are good things to think about, but are they really?
It's another good example, I think, is down in the Caribbean area. So the Navy has the Fourth Fleet that oversees kind of the area that's South America between in the Caribbean Sea area. And a big concern in that area is drug running, right?
Yep.
Drug runners coming from South America, landing on U.S. shores, et cetera. And so there's a fair amount of interest in interdicting those boats and everything that's coming through. And it turns out that maybe sometimes having more eyeballs isn't your limiting step. So right now, the idea is like, well, we can put out more cameras and things like that to give a better sense. But it really turns out, or at least what seems to be the case, is your limiting asset is your ability to actually send a physical entity out there to take either out that boat or to do an interdiction and do an arrest and those sorts of things. So it turns out adding more cameras may not help you. It just helps you see that you're missing more targets.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, you can only send out so many people. So that's another good example of, it makes sense. Like, why wouldn't you put out more cameras to get a sense of what's going on? But when you look at what you're actually going to be doing, it doesn't really help you accomplish the mission of actually preventing or enabling the drug interdiction.
Yeah.
So.
Interesting. So, okay. So what's the drone discussion lately at the office? You guys doing any drone work?
Yeah. Actually, I was just, my colleague Sam Bendit is doing a project for the Marine Special Operations Command. He's been doing for the last year.
I think that's how we saw these guys originally, right? Didn't we see him on LinkedIn, Sam?
It's probably Sam. Sam's very out there.
He's a big LinkedIn guy.
Yeah.
We were supposed to record with him.
Oh, okay. Oh, cool.
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Well, there you
right.
go.
Yeah.
You'll hear a lot from Sam. Sam's been producing for the last year or so for, again, MARSOC, a monthly newsletter that is looking specifically at Ukraine, Russia, unmanned system tactics and evolution and things like that. He's a native Russian speaker, so he looks at Telegraph and gets all the sort of, original language sources, and
Yeah.
it's a great read. Unfortunately, those are all distro B, so you got to be a government agency to get on the list. But if you are, check it out.
A lot of our listeners are, so
Yeah.
they'll find it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a really great example of, in this case, we have language and culture experts who are taking a look at original source information, watching the dialogue that's going on. It's amazing how much of that dialogue is just itself is happening in the open source information, right? Blogs, all the social media.
It's all OSINT.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Even just discussions of like tactics and all this stuff. You probably saw the Russian tactical handbook that was published that got pushed out a month or so ago about like a summary of Ukrainian drone tactics and things like that. So it's amazing, again, like the amount of information and the amount of involvement from the civilian sector, whether that's on both sides in that conflict, people getting involved with drone production or other things, trying to help out, their side in this conflict.
Well, I mean, look, people want to help. The mission's important for both sides.
Mm-hmm.
They all want to win, and drones, obviously, but also it's just a big business, so they're all trying to get in on it. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what's happening now. So this is like the new IED, I guess, kind of for you.
It is very much, and it again, to take it back to the naval mine warfare origins for me. It was interesting to come into that to me and to look back 20 years, because unmanned systems in general, not a new thing, right? But for the military, depending on the level you're talking about in the mission, it's not necessarily a familiar thing. When I got to the Mine Warfare Command, which was in Corpus Christi at the time, they had a recently established unmanned undersea vehicle platoon, a UUV platoon. So basically a torpedo-looking device that they would put in the water, but it was actually had on survey equipment to do, checking of the seafloor for mines.
Yeah.
But they had a group that was dedicated to deploying this tool to help with a mission of trying to locate mines so that the forces could eliminate them. But it was a nascent capability, and due to various reasons I won't go into, it ended up getting moved over to another part of the Navy. But that was an example to me at the time of like, okay, the Navy is trying to figure out how to use these systems. The people that were running those were learning new things. Like, hey, when we take this out to a ship, in particular a minesweeper, which if you've never been on a minesweeper, right, they're very small.
Yeah.
Right, wood or at least fiberglass, depending on the type you're talking about. There's not a lot of extra room there, and so they're doing things like operating out of the EOD closet and things like that, the explosive ordnance disposal guys. But then even like little things come up, like, hey, we got these big batteries. How are we charging these things? And little logistics, things like that come up when you're trying to deploy a new capability that hasn't been, pre-established for the process. And that's always a big thing for, I think, the military, which is sometimes even when you want to try to do something new, it can be a challenge because you've got to figure out like, oh yeah, we never planned to have big storage spaces for extra spare parts, or there's just all these things pop up that you had never planned about. And if you want to do that in a repeatable and reliable fashion, getting those things established can be a bit of a challenge sometimes.
I'm coming back to this because I think it's kind of an important topic. So you mentioned sail drone. I mentioned Saronic, the unmanned surface vessels.
Yeah.
So or like USVs, UUVs, or the underwater ones too. Yep. Like, I think this is the key might be overstating it. This is one of the important new product capabilities for the Navy.
Yeah.
We're not using them yet, like really, but they're like curious about it.
Yeah.
And So I imagine some of your work is on this, but taking a step back from your work, just like let's pretend you and I are the strategists for the country here. How are the Navy? You know the Navy. I was in the Navy. You know how we operate with the Big Blue Navy. We got the carrier strike groups.
Yep.
Big ass ships.
Yep.
We're the Armada, basically. We're the Spanish Armada. How are we going to use these vessels and why and to do what?
Right.
Like I want to let's solve it on the podcast.
Yeah.
Like I just, like what are we doing with them? I had a couple ideas myself, but I don't think any of them are that good.
Yeah.
Are we like putting them on the back of a destroyer and being like, all right, drop these into the water now and drive them?
That's a possibility.
But why? Why not just shoot the cannons? Like,
right.
I guess I'm trying to what are we doing with these things?
Yeah. I think part of it is trying to figure out, is it kind of what you were saying earlier, which is it's a standoff safety issue. Like we can't actually send our big ship into that area because we're going to get shot down and we can't defend it well enough.
Okay, but we're going to send a robot ship?
Yeah.
But to do what?
To do whatever we're going to do, which is either again, right, it will depend on the mission. For instance, let's say it's to blow up the opposing Navy's ships to prevent them from doing something.
Could just shoot them with an artillery shell, though.
Yeah, well, but you need to be able to get close enough to do that.
And they shoot pretty far.
Yeah, but there's so this now gets into the broader sort of strategy problem, which is like what the Marines are dealing with their expeditionary advanced basing stuff. You want to set up a big artillery to lob a gun at someone. You have a limited amount of time before the eyes in the sky see you and schwack you. So there's tactics you can think about, like, move and shoot and stuff like that. But if you're talking about doing that at a place, say like in the Pacific, where there's not a lot of places, or even where you're thousands of miles from your logistics train, that makes it a bit more challenging. And so while you do have a lot of vectors or ways to deliver firepower, the adversary has ways to potentially counter those depending on what you're doing. So the question is, how and when can you amass the fire, to what area and to what end? Again, what are you trying to do? And that's largely, I think, where, going back to, again, I think something that came up earlier, which is trying to understand, what exactly are we trying to do?
So are we dropping them into the water and then they'll drive out and kind of circle the enemy?
Yeah. Well, right. That's an option. So maybe we end up with a bunch of, explosive jet skis.
Yeah.
Remote control jet skis. And you send out, a couple hundred of those, you let them loiter somewhere, and either you have pre-programmed them with target set identification, or you've got some sort of remote capability, but then we got to worry about jamming.
Can we pull up the Saronic Corsair? Pull this one up. Let's take a look at one of these things. I think it's helpful for the visual, for the guests, for the listeners. I mean, let's pull this up. All right. Okay, yeah, here we go. Look at this big boy. All right. Yeah, so we got this. Here's an unmanned surface vessel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It looks like also, for some reason, a human could sit on the back of this.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why they made it look like that, but I'm not the designer. Okay, so we're dropping this into the water.
Mm-hmm.
We're driving it. What are we doing?
Yeah.
What are we doing?
Yeah,
you tell me. You tell me.
Well, again, right, so if we're trying to, let's say we're just trying to blow up an enemy Navy vessel, we are there are likely explosives in the front of that thing, right? That thing should be pure explosives up front, minus the engine and the gas. And we're, depending on the type of target that we're going to take out, we should already have some general calculation about, first of all, like, are we trying to inflict a mission kill, which is basically wounded enough that it can't do what it's supposed to do? Are we trying to sink it? So you got to make those kind of decisions. But at the end of the day, we want to just at least make it the adversary not capable of doing whatever it's trying to do. So we're going to base our numbers and things like that on what we think it's going to take. And so then you're going to put some attrition and all that stuff in there too, right? So let's say we think we need to have like 3 hits to take out a particular ship. So maybe if we're just going to launch after 1, maybe we launch 10. I don't know. It depends how many other targets we have and how we want to do this. But at the end of the day, we're going to come up with some sort of tactic to kind of swarm, overwhelm, zigzag or whatever, and try to hit it and take it out. That's what we're trying to do.
Okay.
But But that's in lieu of the idea that we don't have any other way to hit this thing because we either can't get the firepower close enough, we can't get the power in the sky to be able to take it out that way, or there's some other sort of timing or other sort of critical factor that you need this other approach or way to take something out.
Okay, cool. So in this case, we're thinking the use case is some sort of kamikaze mission.
Yeah.
And then maybe some sensors, like cameras on us, so they can see, so we can decide to abort mission if we don't want to if we don't want to blow everything up.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah. Normally, like with a torpedo, what you'd have is you'd have a bearing and a contact, and you'd have some other indication through means about like that is a valid target.
Yeah.
That is for people that aren't familiar, right? The military is not going to fire on an invalid military target.
Whoa. I mean, as you know, we just shot our own plane.
Well, it's based on the information that you have at the time.
We don't know did we know what happened in that yet or no? I don't think that's come out, the reports.
No.
My sister was the crew or the navigator on the Gettysburg is the one that shot the plane, the F-18. My sister back in the day was the navigator. So I called her. She's Commander Simone. She's still in the Navy. I called her. I was like, your old ship shot a plane. She was like,
don't talk to me.
She's like, I have no words for this right now.
I can say in cases like that, right, the Navy has various processes to manage how they're doing strike warfare and everything. And it could be a variety of things that went wrong, even to something as simple as the planes as they're returning to land back on the carrier are supposed to follow very specific patterns. If they deviate at all from that, the crew that's serving their defense has to look at the information and make a decision about like, do we think this is a threat or not? And so that's how mistakes can happen in a very small way, that mistakes can happen where, again, based on the information you have, you make a decision and then sometimes it's not correct. So that gets to kind of key issues with these sorts of things, which is, so how do we want to think about that? What risk do we want to take when it comes to target selection? In other words, if I'm going to put in that system, which is going to be unmanned, potentially with no communications with me, do I want to give it the ability, if I've told it these are valid targets, whether it's a visual identification or whatever, am I comfortable with a risk assessment of saying, yeah, there's a 95% probability it will strike the actual target, but there's a 5% chance it's going to strike a civilian vessel or something else, if we even know that. But am I okay with that? What's my risk tolerance? Depending on the situation.
That's a tough issue because, like with drones, for example, they're pre-programming them now to say like, hey, fly to this area and just kill like the highest value thing it sees. That's what the AI's programmed to do.
Well, that is another option, which is it is also a potential option for one could argue that from the adversary perspective, or say like the Chinese perspective, they may not care about anything, right? So we have legal boundaries. We do our best to again identify valid military targets, etc. Where I'm going with this is, what we can do though, there's other ways we can do this, which is we create what they're called kill boxes, where you basically say, we're going to create an exclusion area where we're going to send out notices, notice to mariners and all the things that say, do not enter this space. If anything that enters this space will die. Yeah. And then you lift a little bit of that burden when it comes to valid targets, because we've already identified, we said anything in this area is dead. And so
kill box.
Yeah, a kill box.
That's a good podcast name. You come to the kill box, dude.
That's right.
You come to the kill box, you're getting fucked up. Like that's for the next podcast we launch.
Yeah.
All right.
But that's a way to lower that need for having a valid target, because we've said everything's a valid target. And so I have to worry less about like, did my image classification algorithm get that right or not? I've said, if you see anything move in here, take it out. But if we can be a little bit more specific, and even going again back to naval mines, we have mines that will that can blow up given certain stimulus, sound, acoustics, magnetics. There's a variety of things that we can use to set off a mine. And you can get specific enough, for example, to listen for certain acoustic signatures. So all ships sound different, right? They all got a voice based on their engine and the way they move through the water. you could get very specific. It's like a fingerprint about the types of class of ship and things like that. So you could actually create a mine that will only detonate when it hears a certain type of engine sound. And that would, for a mine in particular, which is just sitting there and really doesn't have many eyes and ears, so to speak, other than say that microphone or some other thing. It's some way for you to get some assurance that you're not going to take out an innocent bystander, which is the concern for some of these things.
Yeah. One of my ideas for the tactics for these unmanned surface vessels is like, instead of putting them on the back of our ships, because these seem big, and then you have to like spend the logistics of putting them into the water, is like, instead just like, let's station 1,000 of these in a port in Taiwan. They just hang out in the port. And then, like, if a blockade comes, they go out and smash the blockade.
Right.
Like, they're just sitting and it's kind of like loitering in the port. And then that's kind of a good, because, like, I think a lot about, like, logistics for war, you know, less so the capabilities, because, like, obviously the capabilities, they're good, and we all know what they are. A lot of us know what they are. But, like, how do we get them into the right spot, you know? And so, like, one of the things for these vessels is it just seems like you could just station a ton out of port. They're just sitting there waiting, and then you just send them out. Like, what's the enemy going to do against that?
Right. I think the big issue there, the big concern is that idea of prepositioning. So it does take it's a big distance problem. How do you get stuff out there? How do you get stuff out there safely? If you're looking at it from a Taiwan perspective, there are certainly a lot of things you could have established on Taiwan ready to go. The issue there is
act of war.
Exactly.
Well,
right?
it's Taiwan put them there. You know, they don't have the Saronic logo on it. They got like the Taiwanese flag on these things. Like,
yeah, but at the end of the day, you have that option. There are things you could do, and preposition now. The question is, how covertly can you do that? How overtly do you do that? What different messages does that send? You need to bring in a China-Taiwan expert.
Now that is something I never considered, Jack. Prepositioning. I just got taught.
Preposition.
I thought my idea was sweet until you just kind of shot it down.
Well, it's funny, right? The Marines have prepositioned ships, and the idea is they've got these ships out there that have a lot of gear on them that the Marines need, and in time of need, they can call on those ships, and they will deliver stuff that's, again, prepositioned. It's ready to go. It's more forward than, say, continental United States. So you've saved yourself a bit of time based on where that is. But that's one example of a way to get something out there.
It's tough because like the Pacific is huge.
Yeah.
So I feel you got to preposition.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It was one of the original reasons for the creation of the preposition force was to help with that distance.
Yeah. My company, we talked to the Marines a good amount recently. Obviously they're interested in guns. And, you know, their job would be to like take islands in the Pacific in a future conflict. So they're very concerned about like when they get on the island, you know, not getting smashed by a bunch of DJI drones.
Right.
You know, so they're less concerned with maybe stuff like this. Although they are, because like they don't want to get smashed on the way to the island. But it's like once they get on land, like what's about to happen? What's the new war like? You know?
Yeah.
That's like a big area of concern. You see that in the news when you read articles like on Mattis, like the different vehicles, like trying to outfit them with electronic warfare. You know, lasers, guns, things they can do against drones. Like, I guess, what are some of the countermeasures you guys have looked at recently for drones?
I haven't been looking much at
is that your partner? Is that Sam or Sam's side?
He would have a good sense. I mean, I think my familiarity with it is probably just at the surface level of the typical EW, either whether, you know, it's the jamming type of gun that's trying to send an not an EM pulse, but some sort of a
they're trying to douse it with energy.
Energy, right? Or, you know, the nets or other types of things. Yeah.
How did the nets ever leave the whiteboard? Come on. That's not a real product. The nets?
Yeah.
I love that. Like, we're going to net these things.
Yeah.
Like, okay, there's like 50 more right behind it, dude.
Yeah. I think there was also, you know, the type of capability that's out there now for like counter mortar. So, right, there are devices out there that we have for counter mortar. So if the enemy's lobbing a big artillery shell at you, right, you can detect it and send a counter shot to that pretty quickly. You know, so I think I've seen some things where you've got more like devices that are trained to look for small objects and train on them and shoot. But the threat can come in a variety of different ways, and so I don't really I don't have enough sort of familiarity to see like are there types of tactics that are good for countering a large swath of the different type of capabilities. Otherwise, I think what we've seen is more the say pinpoint sort of what I would call the pinpoint stuff, which is you've got the enemy employing a drone to say take out a shelter or an underground bunker or something, or the Ukrainians trying to take out a Russian tank or whatever, and then the adversary comes in and puts a box around it and those sorts of things. I haven't seen much on the more what I would call deliberate, but the more like, hey, we're going to procure the ANSQ5 or whatever system that's going to be the anti-drone system, and all I do is hit
push
this
the button and it's good to go.
Yeah.
How much? Let's talk about the business of CNA a little. How much would you say is the work or the revenue coming from the DoD versus Congress versus industry?
Oh,
it's like 30 or.
Well, okay. So for a federally funded research and development center, we're congressionally limited in the amount of money that we can take. And that is on the order of about $100 million.
Okay.
The way that works for us is that about half of that comes from the Navy as a line item budget.
Okay.
And the rest then we're allowed to kind of, as the year goes on, try to figure out, well, who needs help and how can we help them? A large chunk of that goes to the Navy, but we work for the Joint Staff and the other services as well. But it's in that sort of that scope and on that order of magnitude. So we have a little bit of leeway when it comes about what studies we're working on, but I'd say we have a whole process every year with the Navy to go through and identify what do we globally for all the units across that the Navy has and everything. What are the high priorities, analytic issues that we might be able to help out with? What's the sort of priorities there? Where do we have expertise that can actually help out on that? What's actually appropriate for us to be working on? And then trying to put those resources.
So you're saying like majority comes from this one line item in the appropriations bill.
Yeah, and again, in sort of the broader scheme of things, we're studies and research group. We don't produce widgets. We analyze things, and comparatively, we're smaller than the other FFRDCs. So we can have limited sort of even just capacity.
But does industry, because industry, like, the primes might need help understanding what they should do too. Do they come for?
We're not allowed to.
We're not allowed.
No.
Why not? It seems like you should be. Help us out, dude.
Yeah.
Come on, we need the help. What?
Where I think that can happen is the government has to ask us. The Navy has to ask, like, hey, we're looking at this particular capability, or we're looking at ways to do this particular mission, and here are the types of capabilities we'd like to look at. How do we think about selecting, or how do we think about understanding how these are going to meet our mission?
Yeah.
And so we have to look at it more from that end. And we do so as we can in the most, analytically rigorous and detached way. We got to just look at the data. If we can't defend it from the data, then we're not going to.
Do you feel like, obviously kind of it, because if you zoom out, like you got the military, the Navy, they're doing their mission, they're busy. They kind of offload their thought work to you guys, right? To what you and many organizations, but they offload it. They're like, hey, I need help looking at this. Kind of. Mm-hmm. That's high level. Do you think then they appropriately internalize your results? Like, when you give us good shit back to them, they're like, okay, now we got it.
Yeah. What I have found that is the more that there's sort of two general approaches that I've seen happen. One is we get what I would call the more ivory tower academic approach, which is like, hey, we're going to see you in 8 months with our answer. That never results in anything good. A more constant dialogue with someone to say like, okay, here's what we're finding, here's what we're sensing. Get thoughts on like, does this make sense? Making sure we're still tracking.
You're saying collaborative approach has been better received.
Yeah, absolutely. It's less out of left field. even when it's right. I mean, we can be as analytically rigorous as we want, and we can be as correct as we want. But if we're so divorced from kind of expectation, or we haven't prepped the battle space in that sense of like, hey, yeah, that thing you thought was like right all along. No, we found out that no, indeed, that's completely wrong. And this is the answer over here. There's ways to have those conversations and bring people along to say like, hey, is this making sense? Because at the end of the day, I think this probably won't be too shocking. When someone learns something for themselves, it's more impactful than when they're told what the answer is, right? And so when we're able to work that collaboratively, that's when things have their biggest impact, because it also helps us make sure that we're not going off the deep end into some analytic rabbit hole that's not actually important.
So does like the information and the results you find, does it go to the like Pentagon, like headquarters, or does it go to like end user units more? Like how's the information flow?
Right. No, it's all over the map depending on who we're end of the day working for. So, a good chunk of our work is for Chief of Naval Operations, so OpNav at the Pentagon. So it might be more, say, budgeteering or systems acquisition or those sorts of things. But another good chunk of it is for the operational fleet. But that might be at the higher headquarters level where they're looking at sort of broader Navy operations in a region. But we also have people, like I said, I was at the Mine Warfare Command. And so able to very specifically focus on this one area, right? We got people at Top Gun, so they're looking at air warfare. And so it really depends where you are.
So it is all levels.
Yeah.
What's the most rewarding or fun, I guess? Who's the best customer of the info?
I am 100% biased to the operational fleet.
Yeah.
I try, like, I get it. I enjoy strategy and vision and talking about like the big picture and big budgets and, the FIDIP, the 5-year analytic or budget plan and all that sort of stuff. And there's some value in that. But the most rewarding for me has been actually out there with the operators, trying to see, okay, this is actually what they're dealing with. That makes their life hard and it puts their life in danger or whatever. How can I help fix that?
I agree. I think we would, even on the industry side, agree when we can work, directly with the operators. You're closer to it. It's just your work feels more like it matters.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it definitely matters helping the bureaucracy too. It just feels different,
It's a very different reward.
Yeah.
It either comes much delayed or it's in the idea that like, yeah, we didn't spend $1 billion on that thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, honestly, we need that. It's the Doge. You got the government efficiency. What, I guess so. Okay. So now you started as, back when you were doing IED work, you're a young lad, now you've moved into managing a team. Yeah. What's the team look like?
Well, it's funny. I would say that I became a manager of like necessity. So when I had come back from the field and I was working on doing more Marine Corps work at the time, situation changed and the team that I was working on was going away. I'm like, okay, that sucks. But there were new opportunities coming up. And one of those things was a team that was going to be oriented around cyber operations and special operations and what was considered non-traditional warfare. I was like, okay, well, I hate the idea of management, but that sounds cool. Like I like those topic areas. That'll be good. And so I signed up to be a manager. And over the years, that's kind of where we've gravitated. Those topic areas, AI, autonomy again, information warfighting, which encompasses a broad number of things. I am in the process as we speak of transitioning back to just doing analytic work. I've had my fill.
You've had your fill.
I have. And
it's a common thing, by the way. It happens all the time in organizations like yours, and even naval reactors. People were like, "I'm done being a manager at naval reactors. I'm moving back."
I think it's not uncommon. I think it's healthy in the sense that CNA hires people with advanced degrees, right? I've got a doctorate in chemistry. I came to CNA to work on interesting analytic problems. There's a certain amount of fulfillment, a limit of the fulfillment I can get by doing a heavier administrative burden.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the thing I find exciting is learning about a new topic area and tackling an interesting analytic problem.
Yeah, I'm
So,
with you on that. Like
yeah.
I have a company that I run, but as you see, I just do podcasts in it.
Yeah.
Like I'm not trying to manage the team. Come on now.
Well, that's their job, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, ideally, right? Again, my team that I had ended up being, I called it the junk drawer, because our organization was largely aligned around a variety of different things like training, operations, organizations and roles and things like that. My team was the only one that was specifically focused on particular warfare areas, cyber, special operations, information warfighting. And not only that, those aren't the straight stick normal Navy missions, right? They're the non-traditional things. And that's all good and well. It's very cool work. But at the same time, what that did is that spread things really thin. Because at the end of the day, I had anywhere from maybe 10 to 12 or 13 people. And maybe 4 of those were out in the field at field billets and assignments. And the people that I had at headquarters were working on a variety of different projects. But at the end of the day, maybe only one time I had like one cyber person or one special operations person.
I like that you give them like they have billets.
Yeah.
Like it's not a military organization, but you still use the terminology.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you're actually part of the Navy in some ways.
Yeah, there's a variety. We always walk a line of making sure that we understand that we're there to support the military alongside them, but at the end of the day, we're not a GS civilian. We're not commissioned officers, right? We're there in a supporting role. But when you're out there every day doing that side by side, you develop very close relationships and you understand the criticality of what's going on.
We talked about LLMs a little bit. Is that an area of research at the company right now?
It comes up. So what I would say is over the last...
Because Sam Altman says we've got super intelligence coming right around the corner.
Yeah. I always liken that.
It's coming.
Yeah, I always liken that to, what's his name? Sir Lancelot, running in the distance.
Yeah.
Running in the distance, always running in the distance at you. And then suddenly he's here slaughtering you, right? So the real question is, when do you cut to that final scene?
Exactly.
It's funny because I got to get into the AI game back in like 2016, 2017, about the time frame that AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol. That was the sort of seminal moment for us internally as an organization. My colleague, Andy Yelachinsky, who's been working in this area for a long time, is the one who brought it to my attention. And that kind of sparked my interest at the time. We started a podcast at that time with him. Ironically, his initials are AI, right? So
nice.
It was perfect. So we called it AI with AI. But we were early in the dialogue of trying, and we were positioned very much in the military sphere to say, like, with the smarts to look at academic research and things going on and say, hey, this is what it's going to mean for the military. And so it was always very interesting. I still remember we talked about the transformers when they first got published and all that stuff that is leading to where we are now with large language models and everything. And we sundowned that about the time that ChatGPT really hit the scene. And which has always made me kind of sad. And here now in the interim 2 years, it's like AI is everywhere. All that is to say, I think we're like any other organization in the sense that we are establishing our own internal procedures, right? We've got our own internal large language model that we're trying to use. An organization like ours has to be really careful about the tools that we have and where we put our information. So because it's even the unclassified stuff, we had to be very careful about. We can't just go to one of the straight stick out there models and put information on it, because then that's just gone and out there, and that's not protecting the information appropriately.
But you're saying you're trying to use it internally to help analysis.
Yeah.
Like
so we're creating the tools and we're trying to see what's it good at, what's it not. I think like a lot of people.
So like, are you buying your own hardware?
We do have like some dedicated server space to run these things and whatnot. But we also have other people. We have a data science division now that routinely uses machine learning methods and other tools and capabilities to help with the work they're doing. But we're starting to, right, the questions are everywhere. So it all depends on who we're supporting and whether they want us to be focusing on a particular thing. I think we found that there's still a lot of there. Everyone's still struggling with how exactly do we use these things. And the one thing that I really have not quite yet figured out is, I see a lot of stuff being sold as time savers, and I'm like, okay, I got it. You want to use this thing to kind of speed up your workflow or whatever. But then there's always this little caveat down here that says like, hey, the output of this might be spurious, so you should double check that. And in the instances that I've seen where it would be the most impactful, all I can figure out is that it's double the amount of work that I need to do, because not only do I need, it's like, oh yeah, no, it's going to have gone through and done all the checking for you, but in the process, it's going to have outputted something that's on the same volume as what you were originally supposed to do. So now, because I need to double check this, I'm reading it, and I'm actually reading the original thing, and I'm doing a correlation. So I'm actually doing a lot more work, or I'm deciding, yeah, I don't have time for this. I'll just take it.
Yeah.
And so that latter case is the more likely case, and that's what scares me.
Yeah. So there's two ways to look at it. There's the LLM as a productivity tool internally, and then there's LLMs on the battlefield.
Yeah.
And what do they have any place on the battlefield?
I'm sure there is.
I can't think of any, but I had to ask the dumb question.
Yeah. I think one area where we've seen
if I talk to an OpenAI sales rep, they say there is.
Yeah.
They say I should put it on my gun. Yeah. But they don't actually know what that means.
Yeah. No, that seems weird to me. I guess where I have seen it be maybe a little bit more impactful is you can see something like, hey, I'm on a ship. I've got all these systems. I've got all these tech manuals. If I dump the tech manuals into the LLM, create a RAG stack and all that stuff, so now I can search and inquire on my tech manuals, I may have a faster way to do troubleshooting and maintenance and things like that.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I used to write the tech manuals.
Yeah,
that was my job. And so I'm very familiar with the tech manuals. I mean, normal search is fine.
Yeah. Well, so that's a good point, and it's something that I don't see a lot of, which is kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, which is it helps when you know what your baseline performance is. And in a lot of cases, we don't know what that is. And I think we still see that a lot. And it's even in the early days of, say, like the 2018 era, when a lot of neural network stuff was getting really popular and people were coming up with all these new methods, there was a lot of pointing to say like, hey, traditional statistical methods still do a better job, and they're a lot faster and cheaper calculation time-wise. So there was a bit of a highlight there of like, yeah, you could use this, but it's not the best tool for the job. And I don't see that a lot. You see like, oh, shiny new tool, let's use this for something.
Yeah.
And the question really is, but is that really any better? Did I really need to do it that way? What's it bringing to the table that I couldn't have done before?
Yeah, I found some like decent narrow use cases for these things, like for myself. Like if I have a spreadsheet and I'm like feeling lazy about it, and let's say I wanted to apply some sort of Python script to the spreadsheet,
Mm-hmm.
I can like upload it to one of these systems like ChatGPT and be like, hey, write me a script that gets every third row.
Yeah.
And I can write that my script myself, but it'll do it. And like that's a really narrow use case. It'll save me 20 minutes.
Right.
And I think these things are fine for it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if like you just apply it to everything randomly. But I see a lot of that right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the things I've said when trying to help even just like senior leaders think about like, what do I make of all this AI stuff is never make the AI for the sake of the AI. You're trying to do something.
Yeah.
And you should be leveraging an appropriate tool to help you with that. AI might be the appropriate tool. It might not be. Where the gap typically is people may not be in the position to know well enough, whether because they don't know how the tool works.
No, they read the news and they see Sam Altman out there saying they've created God.
Right.
And they're like, oh, we got God now.
Yeah. Yeah. How do I get my God? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, that's a pretty common, I call it kind of the AI paradox, which is you need to make sure you're not focusing on the AI. Ultimately, you have a thing to do. You're going to leverage it as a tool. But at the paradox is you actually do need to worry about the AI because you need to know, is that the right tool for the job? And if you're thinking longer term, do I have the right training? Do I have the right tools, the compute power, all those things to be able to actually employ it?
Yeah.
So
I think it's just it's, not everyone has a PhD in chemistry. So it can be hard for some people.
Yeah.
Like, they don't know exactly what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. Wow.
And- But for me, I just don't like the word AI, like artificial intelligence. I think it confuses people. I think it's just software. Like, okay, what do you want the software to do?
Complicated software.
Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, but like it makes people forget what you said. They're like, well, I think it's magic. But really, it's just a tool. LLM is a product, a tool that does something.
Right.
And so, like, you just have to understand the things it does and the things it doesn't do.
I often use an automated teller machine, ATM, as an example about thinking about AI, et cetera, which is the reason we call it an automated teller machine is it takes the place of a teller, but it only does very specific things. You're not going to come up to the ATM and it's going to ask you, are you feeling hungry? Would you like some food? I can get you some, I can call right? And
maybe in like some sort of idiocracy world, it might, the ATM will start serving you McDonald's.
Exactly. But the point is like, it has a specific function. We know what the inputs and the outputs are going to be and what they need to be. You don't need anything fancier than that. Sure, you could add something in with facial recognition and some sort of like personality chat bot. So now you've got the ATM talking to you. But at the same time, do you want to be walking up in a 7-Eleven to an ATM and having the ATM talk to you and with your name and all that?
It's like when they were doing, remember, like this was like early 2000s or something, or they're trying to make like every gadget smart, like your fridge. Your fridge would talk to you and stuff.
Yeah.
They gave up on that.
Yeah.
But it was like that part of that era of IoT.
Yeah. Very good example of like, hey, we can do this now, but no one's stepping back and saying like, but do we need that? And that goes back to that idea of it's really hard if you're looking at all the potential tools out there. There's always lots of things you could do with them.
Yeah.
But the focus needs to be on what are you actually trying to do. Now, the difference there is with any new technology and capability, I try to scope it out in this way, and I jokingly call it the Broyles law. But 90% I say is you're going to take that new tool, whether it's AI or anything else, and you're going to do what you do now better, whether it's faster, more accurate, whatever. But you're going to apply it to what you already do now. 9% is going to be stuff that you've always wanted to be able to do, but you didn't know how to, you weren't capable, but this tool enabled you, whether it's because you didn't know how to code, but now I can go to the LLM and tell it like, hey, yeah, write me a script for this. And, oh, great. And then there's like going to be that 1% that's like, holy shit, I had no idea that was even possible.
Yeah.
That will dramatically change. Like I can now stop doing this type of thing and do this, and it will actually meet what I'm trying to do.
And this is why I actually think that the value capture for this new wave of AI, this new capability, these LLMs, is going to come from the application layer.
Yeah.
Like someone is going to be like, here's this amazing new service I've created. Underneath it, I use the API of OpenAI or what's the other ones? Claude.
Oh yeah.
Llama, whatever. But someone's going to like create a new service.
Yeah.
Like it's the Uber moment. So you had the iPhone and then you got Uber.
Yep.
Like we have this new tool and it's like an amazing time for entrepreneurs because someone's going to create something that consumers are going to love.
Right.
And they don't have to care about what it's capable of. They're just going to have this new service they get to use with all this stuff underpinning it. And so honestly, it's an amazing time for entrepreneurship. I think the company that captures the most value out of AI hasn't even been created yet.
Yeah.
It hasn't been formed. They haven't even formed the C Corp.
Yeah. I also use the LLM as a good example to say like, just wait another couple of years. There will be another new big thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And there's going to be a couple more discoveries.
Yeah.
Like we're a couple discoveries away from super intelligence probably.
I think we'll see a number of sparks along the way. In the early days, quote unquote early days, again, like 2017, the big thing was GANs, right? These generative adversarial networks. They're still actually out there if you look. But I remember at the time, again, this was like 2018, 19, we called it the GAN Zoo. Everywhere, everyone was publishing their own generative adversarial network. And then lo and behold, right, Transformers came along, and here we are now in the LLM world. So give it another couple
And I'm sure
years.
it's probably already exists in
Yep.
some paper somewhere.
Yep.
The new thing.
It is.
And I'm not close to the academic world, so like I don't know, but I'm sure they're already on it.
Yeah,
Like,
no,
and it's coming.
I remember in the early days when we had started our podcast, we talked about, because such a resurgence had happened and the AlphaGo moment was so seminal, we looked back and, right, it's been well codified and understood at this point, right? There were these AI winters and all these things that we probably don't need to go into, but there were slow periods in the development of where we are now. And there were a variety of reasons for it, and the spark now for a variety of reasons. But particularly, say, 8 years ago, there were a lot of open questions like, do our current theories and tools, do they have an upper limit? Can we really just apply more compute power? Will they keep scaling? And there was this idea, and the debates are still going on heavily in the academic world with the symbologists and the literalists and all this stuff. But there's still, I think, a question out there about how far can we go with the way we currently under things. What are those new theories, sparks, going to be that allow us to do the things that we couldn't before, the longer term memory type of issues, or the sort of real world contextual information, so we can get to better things like one-shot learning and those sorts of things.
It's an incredible time to be alive.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's wild. It's amazing.
The amount of progress over the last 8 years has been, ridiculous. It's exciting in so many ways about where things will be headed. It always makes me chuckle too to think about back when Star Trek: The Next Generation was a hot TV show in the late 90s, mid 90s. I remember the writers saying that something like they had to purposefully slow down the progress of technology in order to write about it. But the point being is, things just get faster and faster and faster. But they realize, right, we got a television show that's going to be about a future state. We got to slow down progress because you just can't keep up with the way things would probably be going. There's this idea that they sort of unnaturally had to slow down the pace of development.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy time to be alive. Like for our company, our system's vision based, so a lot of computer vision work. We're just we're piggybacking on all of this work from academia and using it, and we're just trying to absorb all of the cutting edge stuff that's coming out and trying to put it into the product. And it's amazing to see the stuff that's coming out. I mean, we're trying to. This is a hard thing to see at try to see this at 600 yards. It's pretty tough with a camera system, especially on a cluttered background. So, and imagine it's moving. So you got behind this trees, and then this is pretty tiny, and it's 6 football fields away, moving pretty fast. It's a hard problem.
Yeah.
And, we're using as much cutting edge research as we can and trying to read the papers and put it into the product. And it's crazy to see the stuff coming out. I mean, it's truly amazing.
And even when that gets operationally employed, what will be interesting then to see is when someone tries to stop it, what techniques do they develop and how are you going to work? I was just looking at a document that was describing some of the tactics evolution and happening in Ukraine, Russia. And so thermal imaging is clearly a big issue. And so there's some organization out there providing these thermal dispersing capes, for soldiers to be able to not eliminate, but to lessen their thermal signature in a way that might be at least beneficial. But I think what's fascinating, and we probably don't have time to dig into this too much, but going back to that idea of so much is happening in the blogosphere and open source intelligence and all that stuff, that's also a bit of a challenge because you get a lot of noise from the sense of someone encounters an event and they think something happened, and they provide that information. They say, hey, this happened and this thing worked. Well, depending on their situation, what actually happened, that thing what they thought might have happened might not have happened at all. And so I think what'll be interesting again as time goes on and watching that is how much that factors into really understanding, okay, what are effective tactics, what are effective counters.
Yeah, I mean, it might be like they don't have the right data or something.
Right.
For our startup, imagine us. We're not even on, the battlefield really. Where's our data coming from?
Yeah.
Synthetic data.
Yeah.
A lot of it too, like with Unreal. Another crazy tool, Unreal Engine.
Yeah.
Who would have thought a game engine would be such a vital tool in war?
Yeah.
I mean, we generate most of our data with Unreal Engine.
Yeah.
Of this, so like we'll drop the threats in, and then we'll drive them around in different weather conditions, different cityscapes. Take millions of images, and then even like use AI to like generate thermal images of thermal signatures and stuff like that too. And it's crazy how much data you can just generate too. And for our application, it works really well because we're trying to point a gun at a thing. It doesn't need to like have as much real world data as you would think.
Mm-hmm.
Like you just need a lot of just data of these threats, and you can get accurate models of like the Iranian drones or any of the threats and do that.
Put them in the system.
So it's like a kind of another amazing tool.
Yeah. I think the ability to do that, and then the ability then when you actually get in the operational environment to see what the in situ data actually being generated is and how quickly can you sort of react.
Well, yeah, we can we'll incorporate like real world data too, but like I don't know if you guys study this or know this much, but like the real world data is never going to be able to keep up with what we can generate.
Yeah.
Like it's just insane. Like the amount of situations we can create in Unreal Engine.
Yeah.
Like our models will always be more accurate than someone who's just basing it off of like limited battlefield data.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like for the organizations that don't do this, I think they're going to get just totally left in the dust. Like for defense companies that aren't using synthetic data.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able to keep up at all.
Yeah. What I'm curious is as that sort of happens and things are sort of primed that way, as we operationally employ them, the mechanisms that we have to ensure that those were accurate
one will be, is our gun hitting the drone or not?
Yeah.
I mean, so we'll have good data on our side. Other products, I'm not sure if it'll work as well. It really uniquely is great for like a kinetic kill product like ours. I don't know, but maybe it doesn't work for everything.
I was going to say it's much more clear, certainly.
Yeah, it's clear.
It's harder with things such as like just say radar when you're just trying to detect an object, because you always run into the problem of, well, was that object really there or not? And so if you don't have other ways to verify
for a
sources,
it's for a vision-based gun, it makes a lot of sense. Maybe not as much for like a radar-based interceptor system or something.
The challenges are certainly different. Yeah.
We do actually we have been asked before to like kind of apply our synthetic data for radar, like create like synthetic radar information, like, but we don't do that.
Okay.
That's not our thing.
Yeah.
And I don't even think we would know how. But I think some people are trying to look at that because they want more. They want, because like all they have now is like what radar picks up, and that's like real world information.
Yep.
But they obviously want more.
Yeah.
These companies. I don't know if anyone's working on that, but not us.
Yeah, probably. I recall like in the early days with the mine warfare stuff, one of the ideas was to have unmanned systems go out, tow a system, and collect data and whatever. And there was an attempt in the early days, again, this is like 20 years ago, particularly like one of the unmanned systems that would go out, it could go out for an extended period of time, say like 20 hours. And when it would come back with a lot of information that then had to be digested and analyzed, whether by an operator looking through it or something. And the idea at the time was, well, maybe we can speed that up and like pre-detect and do something. So some onboard processing that while it's out there doing the thing, it can at least like go through and do some initial culling and speed up that process. So it's not out for 20 hours, coming back, and now I got to go through 20 hours of data. It was really hard.
Yeah.
Especially depending, right? Even the seafloor can be really cluttered. And so there can be a lot of noise depending on where you are and things like that. I've lost beat on kind of where that sort of technology is, but things have come a ways that you would think that maybe we could do better with those sort of auto detection things. But unfortunately, for good or for bad, I've tried to a little bit distance myself away from mine warfare. But.
So what would you say is what's next what's the outlook for this year? Are you guys your organization is not political, obviously, so it doesn't really change administration to administration.
It's typically minor fluctuations. Yeah, because like even Navy leadership's not going to.
Yeah, I mean, your analysis is independent of who's in the White House.
Yeah.
So what's the outlook? I guess this year priorities. Like, what are some of the big? I guess drones for your partner Sam.
Yep.
What are some of the areas of focus? What are you excited about as we wrap up here?
Yeah. I personally am going to be doing some things. I'm supporting the Joint Staff J7 with some futures work. So they're looking out far distance, like 2040 time frame.
Yeah.
So it's simultaneously fun, but also like simultaneously odd, because it's like there's a lot of things that's like, okay, we're talking about this crazy stuff. I think, one big thing for our operations division is the Navy does a big exercise called large scale exercise. And that's going to be happening in this summer. And we send about 40 people out to ships in various locations to support that exercise. And that particular event is centered around a variety of warfighting areas that are designed to think about a Pacific fight.
Yep.
And so that's a pretty critical moment, not only for the Navy as they're working and practicing and training and doing these things, but also for us analytically to say like, okay, you're saying you needed to do X. Here's the information we gathered, and here's how we think you did on X. So that's going to be a pretty big event. There's a variety of other things going on that I think will be kind of important, just writ large. We do projects more, I'd say, like on a year time frame and on a variety of different topics. So we've got, say, different things looking at, again, analysis of alternatives, looking at different type of systems. I think it'll be interesting. I'm hoping that the Navy will make some substantive steps in the next few months on some broader, bigger picture movements on AI, trying to think about organizationally about how they're going to be tackling it. It's a really hard problem when you're an organization as large as the Navy, where, and the fact that anything AI can touch, how do you enable the writ large across your organization without trying to necessarily sort of stranglehold control over it because there's just too much stuff. So there's a balance there of trying to encourage and enable while also, pointing things in the right direction to make sure things are moving forward. Because everyone's got a job, they're busy. It's yet another thing depending on what they're trying to do. And so how do you kind of help them make better decisions and move forward?
Look, well, I'd say I think the Navy appreciates your work. Definitely needed. Busy Navy needs help with the thought work. And awesome for coming on the show today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Yeah.